lot of you know that I've been interested in the War of 1812 for the last few years. You may not know that about the Aman Trust, and I just want to briefly say that some of our members here, Dick Charlton is a member of the Aman Trust, and I'm going to just kind of be very brief because I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. But the Aman Trust is a non-profit organization that sponsors historic preservation, the heritage and preservation of some of the historic sites in Bladensburg. And we were sitting at a recent meeting about 3 or 4 years ago now, and we were saying, well, the bicentennial of the War of 1812 is coming up. Incidentally, this program was scheduled several months ago, but of course with the passing of Jim Hollis, that program was canceled, so we're trying to get it in this year. At our Aman Trust meeting, we were saying, well, what can we do for the War of 1812? What sort of thing? And we were saying, well, you know, and there was a battle in Bladensburg. There should be something done. Maybe we could build a monument to, as a tribute to the soldiers, sailors, and Marines who fought at Bladensburg. We all know it was a terrible loss, but the whole story really hasn't been fully told. So let me just say that that was probably the easiest part of the thing. Let's build a monument. And then you start saying, well, how do you do that? What's the next thing you do? It's not as easy as just thinking up the idea. So one of the very first things we did, we hired this young lady that's going to talk about the monument. And I think it was the first decision we made after we decided to build this monument was to hire her to come up with a design and try to figure out how we're going to do this thing. That's what she's going to talk about today. So I just wanted to introduce her. Her name is Joanna Blake. She is from Mobile, Alabama. She went to Auburn University. She's married. She married a fellow from Auburn who happened to grow up in the Washington area. Luckily came back to this area and actually lives on the battlefield where the Battle of Bladensburg was fought, right in Cottage City, Maryland. So she's going to tell us today. She has a small child, and she's been working on this for about probably more than 3 years now. And she's going to fill you in on exactly how we're doing. Incidentally, we're still raising money for this thing, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that at the end. I hope everybody will take one of the flyers, give you a little bit more background on it. And but let's let Joanna take it from here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to all of you at the American Legion. I see quite a few familiar faces from the Kiwanis Club, with whom I've already given the same presentation. So if you guys want to take a nap now, I mean, I know it's like, after that nice lunch, I feel like I could take a nap too. Anyway, it's going to be sort of the same talk, but just kind of talking about how this project has evolved. And you said earlier when you spoke that you might not know about this project, and I can't believe that anybody here who has ever met John Giannetti hasn't heard about this project, because he has been the biggest cheerleader and advocate for this project, and the Aman Trust as well, just for the whole area of Bladensburg, you know, restoring old properties in that area and doing historical preservation, really important work in the area of Bladensburg. The first image from the presentation is the site, and so where this photo was taken, I was actually standing right by the Peace Cross. So if you're familiar with the Peace Cross, that gives you an idea of where the proposed site is. And if you're there at the Peace Cross, which is a monument for the First World War, there's also a Korean War memorial close by, Vietnam, 9/11, World War II, but nothing for the Battle of Bladensburg, nothing that acknowledges that, yes, it was a defeat, but it was a major American event took place right there in Bladensburg. And so, yeah, the Aman Trust has decided to recognize that fact. So these are some images of the site. It's at the Balloon Park. It's a property that's owned by the Maryland Parks and Planning. There's John on this. This is really the first day that we went down there and sort of thought, okay, if there's going to be a memorial in Bladensburg, you know, where should it be? And we thought that it should be within the vicinity of these other monuments and memorials. Then the next step was to go to Baltimore, because there are quite a few 1812 memorials in Baltimore, but actually I would call those monuments, because things turned out quite differently in Baltimore than they did in Bladensburg, and everything there has this kind of towering feel to it, very triumphant architecture. This is the Francis Scott Key Memorial. Actually, this earlier one was, they began construction of this piece in 1815, as early as 1815. So, and this key one, you know, with the gilded figure on top, and it's very much triumphant, which is a different feel than we were going for. I mean, that was one of the challenges early on, is how do you commemorate a defeat? How do you tell the story of the defeat through the architecture and through the sculpture? So actually I was looking at some of Latrobe's mausoleums. Who's a Federalist architect who was one of the early designers of the U.S. Capitol, because I wanted it to sort of feel like it had always been there, or at least allude to Federalist style architecture. So that's where some of the design came about. This is in Patterson Park in Baltimore, and I mean, obviously I'm a big fan of this piece if you are familiar with the earlier design. So the way that kind of evolved was to think about something that was a little more, maybe funereal is not the word. So then the other thought was, part of the story that's not told a lot is the story of Joshua Barney, who was a Revolutionary War hero as well as one of the heroes of the War of 1812. And he actually showed up to the fight later, but he had his flotilla with him and a force of about 500 Marines. And these guys didn't retreat. They held their ground up to the point that Barney was wounded. And so we decided that you know, he was really the hero of the battle, and that Joshua Barney should be represented, but that he, not in a moment of triumph, but wounded. And so having a wounded figure is a kind of a way of representing that things didn't go so well. You know, you get that sense from it. So this is early on, just using friends. The guy in the center is John Giannetti's son. You know, just to try and get some people together to think about how that pose might look of a wounded soldier, and then two other guys. So from that I came up with this. This was the first initial sketch. And it originally said, undaunted in defeat, which seems more honest to me, but nobody liked that. Nobody liked the word defeat on the monument. So now it's undaunted in battle, and actually they've sort of adopted this. Undaunted in defeat was John's idea, but the whole idea of undaunted, they've kind of adopted that title for all of the sort of publicity that's going on around the War of 1812 for our region. So then once that was approved, I made a small sculpture. This is 1 inch to the foot scale, a kind of a sketchy sculpture that's called a maquette. And it just kind of gives you an idea of what something might look like in three dimensions. And this guy right here shows you the scale of a person in relation to the finished piece. This is actually, I threw this in here because I really like these. I went to Constitution Hall. The DAR has quite a few of Barney's original. They have one of his swords and his epaulets from I think these were probably not the ones that he wore into battle. These were probably more of a dress, part of a dress uniform, but I really liked him, so I put him in the sculpture anyway. And this is actually the shot that came out of Barney's leg. He died about 4 years after the battle as a result of complications to that wound. So it must have been a pretty terrible 4 years after the Battle of Bladensburg. But this is the shot that came out of his leg, and somebody turned it into a little medallion or pendant that you could wear, and it has an inscription around it. It's pretty Victorian, kind of a morbid thing to do, but a very cool piece of jewelry. So then the next step was I went to Fort McHenry in Baltimore, and they have Defenders Day celebration every year, and I got to meet a lot of guys who are living history experts. They're reenactors for the War of 1812. And I approached them and said, I'm a sculptor, I'm making this monument for the Battle of Bladensburg, and would you be willing to model for me? And they were pretty excited about it, and were gracious enough to come back to the studio several times to try out different poses. This is Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Williams. He is a former Marine who works at Quantico. And this is Myron Peterson. His uniform that he typically wears for reenactment events is very close to what Joshua Barney would have been wearing in the Battle of Bladensburg. And then this is Robert Stewart. He actually was working for the National Park Service and was teaching high school in Baltimore, and he is posing as the figure of Charles Ball, who was actually a former slave who served as a cook on Barney's flotilla, but once the fighting started in Bladensburg, he was manning a cannon, and so he's depicted in the sculpture as well. So these are the guys in the studio getting all the gear on, and actually I think this was in maybe January or February, so having these wool clothes on was okay. But if you can imagine August 24th, being in Washington in August in these wool uniforms, it's amazing that, so we tried several different poses, and then ultimately the design flipped from the original version because Barney was wounded in the right thigh, and we wanted to show that. And also it made more sense that the figures be facing in the direction from which the British were approaching. So the whole design sort of flipped. But we tried a couple of different options, ways of Barney being wounded, but how, like, to what extent. This is where he's just kind of down on one knee. And anyway, so I tried a couple of different things and, brought it back to everybody, and they said, well, we kind of liked your first idea better, so, but at that point I felt like I had exhausted most of the possibilities, and I was really happy to kind of come back to the original design of things. So that's it. And so this was that, I had the models come back for one last photo session and really photograph them. Did another inch to the foot model. This is just a little Photoshop version of what it might look like at the site. Although that area of planting, there's a drainage system that runs underneath it, so it won't support the weight of the limestone and the bronze. So it's actually going to be out front of that site. This is a little plywood mock-up that we did of the sculpture, just to kind of get a feel for, is it the right size, before I started working on it the full size. And that's my daughter right there. Then the next step was to sculpt this model that's right here behind me, and to try and get all of the details right. We consulted military historians and different people who would. Well, actually, one of the biggest changes was the field carriage for this cannon was too small in this version, but otherwise they were like, it looks pretty good. So once I got the go-ahead at this scale, I had it digitally enlarged in foam, and so this is the full size of the sculpture when it was first in the studio and under construction. And that's my little studio assistant there. Again, you can see her in the foreground helping me.
Be a sculptor too.
Yeah, she would come in and scrape the clay off, and then I would have to put it back on. But yeah, that's the piece. And then this is the completed piece in clay. And then the next step was for it to go to the foundry in Chester, Pennsylvania, which is where it is now, that's being cast in bronze, and that process takes between 4 to 6 months. And here, this is just an image of it leaving the studio. So it was on the first floor for the front of the building, but the truck backed down the alley from behind the building, so they used a chain hoist, and it had to go over, it had to go through the railing. They took the railing down, and it was very dramatic. But at that point, once they lowered it down, and this is a photo of all the guys putting the piece on the truck. And then this is, so it went to the foundry, it was cut to pieces, a rubber mold has been made on it, and the plaster mother mold, and they're making, these are all of the pieces of it cut up, lying around on the floor. And these are just some of the, I went up for a wax inspection to make sure that all of the details were there. And these are some of the pieces in wax. So, not to get into too much about the process of lost wax, but if you've heard the term lost wax casting before, it's because they make wax positives of the piece, and then they dip it in a ceramic shell, and then once the ceramic shell has dried, they fire it in a kiln to like 2,500 degrees so that all of the wax burns out of it. So the wax is literally lost in the process, and that's where you get the term lost wax casting. And then they'll take that vessel, that ceramic vessel now, and bury it in sand, and then they can pour the molten bronze into that ceramic vessel, because there's no metal that you could pour molten metal into that wouldn't melt, right? So it has to be a ceramic form. So these wax positives are just just a way to get to that ceramic shell piece. And then, so these are some images of that ceramic shell. It's really hard to tell what you're looking at. But then they bust the ceramic shell off with a hammer, and then they sandblast the bronze pieces, and then they weld all of those pieces together like a big jigsaw puzzle, and then we'll put a patina on it. So that's basically where this project is now, is at the foundry. The Aman Trust is working on getting the contract together with the stone people, Pagliaro Brothers. They're doing the restoration of the National Art Museum, the new wing of the Art Museum downtown. So, and hopefully we're shooting for the 199th anniversary of the battle, which will be this August. I think August 25th, they're talking about having a little unveiling, and then the following year, August 24th, which will be the actual 200th anniversary of the Battle of Bladensburg, having the memorial dedicated at the site. So, yeah. I don't know if you wanted me to talk about some other projects, or if you want to just leave it at that. I don't know if you guys...
It's okay. Joanna has worked on a lot of other interesting things. She worked on the World War II memorial down on the mall, and she since got our commission. She has worked on a couple of other things. I think people might be interested. Just take a few
sure, I can just sort of briefly explain. These pieces are for the Contrabands and Freedmen Cemetery Memorial in Alexandria near Route 1. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that area, but at the onset of the Civil War, Alexandria was under Union occupation. So if you could make it as far as Alexandria, if you were a slave and you could escape and make it that far, then you would be under the protection of the Union Army. And so a lot of people showed up there, and you had the same kind of problems that you have with other refugee situations, like overcrowding and poor sanitation and disease. And so quite a few people died, but the War Department kept really careful records of that. And so at some point in the 1940s, all of the people who died were buried in Alexandria on Route 1, right there by the Wilson Bridge interchange. And then at some point in the 1940s, the city gave them someone permission to build a gas station on top of that site. So a lot of the graves were destroyed when the tanks were being dug for the gas station. And then in the 70s, they built an office building on top of it. But since the new construction around the bridge, they're trying to put a memorial there for the people who are buried there. And so one of the panels is of people escaping slavery coming to Alexandria, which is what's depicted here. And then the other panel is all of school children, and it was very important for those parents for their children to learn how to read. That was the thing they were most important. They cared the most about, because if you were a slave and you were caught learning to read, you could be killed. So it was really important for them that their children learn to read. And another reason that they wanted to focus on this was, of the 1,800 people buried there, more than half of them are children under the age of 10. So it's about 1,000 kids under the age of 10. And they're not sure who is buried where, but they have this technology where they can kind of do a scan of the ground so they can tell the size of the grave, whether it was an adult or a child. So these sculpture panels that I'm really honored to have had a chance to work on are just part of it. They're going to have the records, and there will be everyone's name who's buried there will be listed. That's actually my neighbor, Evelyn, posed for this one. And then this project is one that I was working on recently. I teamed up with Davis Buckley Architects. They did the Japanese American Memorial and the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial that honors fallen police officers every year right here in DC. Anyway, we were selected as semifinalists for a monument that Virginia, the state of Virginia, is creating for women. So that's an example of that piece, and she's the lady from the Seal of Virginia, if you're familiar with that. Anyway, and so this is just another example of the piece at the site. I'm not sure how that got out of order, but that's that earlier one for the Women's Monument in Virginia. And this is the architect's rendering of what that would look like on the site. It would be in Richmond at the grounds of the state capitol. But anyway, there we are back at our site in Bladensburg. I'm not sure why those got interspersed, but anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. She's really a very talented young lady, and we're very lucky to have her. You know, one of the aspects of this thing is that we've had to raise a lot of money, and I guess we're past the $450,000 mark, but we're still a little short. So I hope you'll take one of these flyers, read it, and you know, as I was saying earlier, we were hoping to have a fundraiser with the American Legion Post. Because every donation that we receive, substantial donation, we're going to put the name of the organization or the individual. We've raised over $100,000 through organizations and individuals. The other money came from grants that we received, and also the state of Maryland has helped us, and the Bicentennial Committee. So I hope you might consider it. Someone came up earlier, and this is a check. Now, if, for example, someone wanted to make a small donation or a donation of any size, and just put that Doolin post 59 on there, and we can put the name, the post number and name on the monument, along with the Daughters of the American Revolution, various chapters, and individuals. So that's something we can talk about at a later time, but I hope that you might take one of these flyers, consider making a donation, and if we can get up to the mark.
Some on the tables there, John.
What is it?
Pass them out, people can stick them.
Well, we'll pass them out, and anyway, thank you for taking the time to listen to this thing, and it's a tribute to the soldiers, sailors, and Marines that fought at Bladensburg. Now, there were 350 American casualties, dead and wounded. Here, we'll pass these out to you. We'll get them out to you. It's right here. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much, and hope you'll consider making a contribution in the name of our post.
Did anyone have any questions? Did you have any? Yeah. Yeah, that's.
When you made that model,
This one.
Yeah. Did that get separated into parts too, or was that a single cast?
Actually, this cast, this arm is cut off here, and the arm and the sword were cast separately, and then the sword, this end of the sword was cast separately.
So then how did they weld so clearly transparent so that you can't tell that they've been pieced back together?
This one is actually just plaster, and so you can clean it up and glue it, and then it's got a layer of bronze powder and paint on top of it. But at the foundry, they're amazing craftsmen, and they're able to weld the piece back together and then chase the welds so that you don't see any of it. It's really remarkable. I mean, when they were doing this kind of work, 5,000 years ago, they're ancient bronze pieces, they would actually incorporate, because you can only cast pieces so big, as big as you can make a ceramic vessel. So smaller pieces would have been cast in sections, but they had what they called cold joints. So they would have hidden the seams like in an arm, or in a sleeve or a wrist, and they would have had cold joints where the piece would sort of fit in and then just have a pin that held it in place right before welding. But now, all of this texture that I really love, because I think it's, it's evidence of the artist's hand, and it makes the thing look handmade instead of, machined. But they're able to recreate all of that after they've welded it together. So the foundry work is really spectacular, and they're quite skilled at what they do, yeah.
And it's American made.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and incidentally, the foundry that's doing the job is the same foundry that did the World War II memorial on the mall.
Right.
They were the low bidder. They gave us a wonderful price, and the stonework, which is it's a big part of the expense of the whole thing, and the erection of this thing, was also the same people that did the World War II memorial on the mall. So we've really got
They're a
some
local
top-flight
company
people.
as well.
And I think Joanna has done a first-class job, and even though she's just starting her career, she's worked on a lot of interesting projects here, but I really want to thank you, and you've
Thanks.
done a wonderful job.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks.